friends, it's Christy. So excited to be back with you on the Lawn Fawn YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using the brand new A Mole Lot of Flowers plus A Mole Lot of Love, Spring Basket, and all the speech bubbles. I've stamped the images in Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink on Copic friendly cardstock, and I'm going to be coloring with my Copic markers. I'm going to start with my moles, and I'm going to be using some neutral grays for them. I'm using N3, N5, and N7. I'm going to add my shadows in based on how they are facing. I like to keep the faces nice and light so you can really make out those features. So I put the shadows down the back side of the body. I'm also going to add a little bit of that N7 to the tire of the wheelbarrow. And then I'll start blending out the N7 with the N5. The darker colors can especially leave a little bit of a harsh line behind, so I'm making sure to go over the edge of that N7 with the N5 and pull that darkest shade into the midtone. For the baby mole that is popping out of the dirt, I'm going to use N5 for the darkest. I wanted him to be just a shade lighter than the mom and dad. Next, I'll bring in the N3 and start going over the edge of the N5 with that. I quickly realized though that I actually wanted to have a fourth shade in there just for a little extra highlight on these guys. So I'm going to leave some room on both of them. There'll be a little bit less of it on the dad mole, which is the one that is holding the shovel in my little scene, just because that shovel and his arms crossed in front would be casting more shadows on the body. Then I'll bring in the N1 and I'll finish off the mom mole and also the dad. And then I will finish off the baby with that third shade as well. And I forgot to finish up the tire, so I just went back and did that with the N5. And then I realized that I forgot one of the mom mole's legs, so I'm going to color that in and also color all of their noses with that N7. Next, I'm going to bring in some pink tones, and I kept two of my lightest grays for now as well. I'm going to do their faces, hands, and feet with these pink shades. I'm using R11, R20, and R22. I added just a touch of that R22 because it is quite dark, and then I'm going to blend out with the R20 and then finish with the R11. But I wanted it to look just a little bit more natural and not quite so bright. So that's what the lighter shades of gray are for. I'm going to go right over the darkest part of the pink with the N3. And then I'm going to blend over that with the N1, or blend out from that with the N1, going into the midtone of the pink. That just knocks it back a little bit and made it seem a little bit more natural. And then while I have those pink shades out, I'm also going to give them some rosy cheeks. I'm just going to use the darkest two pinks for this because they are quite dark already. So the R22 for a little bit of blush, and blending out with the R20. I'm also going to add it to my earthworms. You can do it before or after coloring the rest of them. And since they will be so much lighter, I thought that would be fine. So I'm going to switch now to some brown shades for the dirt. I wanted to go with some like medium to light browns. So I chose E51, E53, and E55. I'm going to start with that E55 and lay in some shadows on each of these little piles of dirt. I'm doing it on either the left or the right, depending on where I want to place it on the card. And I am blending that out with the E53. And then I'll use the E51 for a little bit of a highlight. But I wanted to add some more texture to this and make it really look like some freshly turned over earth that maybe has some little particles and stones and things in it. So I'm going to add some dot detail with the E59. Just going to add a few in the darkest shadowed areas on each of those. And then to help that kind of blend into the rest of the dirt, I'm also going to do some dot detail with the E55. And I really like the way that that just adds a nice bit of texture in there and kind of brings those piles of dirt to life. Next, I'm going to bring in some cool grays. These are going to be for the shovel and also the metal frame of the wheelbarrow. I wanted the grays that I used for this to be different from the grays that I used for the moles so that it would really stand out against them since they're kind of right in front of both of them. So I used C1, C3, and C5. This is kind of my go-to combination for anything that I want to look kind of silvery metallic. And then I'm going to switch to some green shades for my wheelbarrow and also the handle of my shovel. I'm going to make these kind of matching gardening supplies. So I'm using G21, G24, and G28 for that. And starting with the G28, for the wheelbarrow, I'm blending toward the center, and for the handle of the shovel, I'm just blending toward the top. I also did the handle to match. Then I'm going to switch greens to YG11 and YG17 and use this to color in all of my leaves. I wanted it to be just a little bit of a lighter version of the green so it didn't look too much the same. For the little earthworms, I'm going to go with some peachy shades, and that is because as a little girl, I was just in love with Slimy from Sesame Street, who was the little friend and companion of Oscar the Grouch. For whatever reason, I just loved that worm, and so I tend to color my earthworms to look like him. But I'm going to move on now to some blue violets using BV11, BV13, and BV17. And I'm going to do every other little flower in each of the clusters. And I am just altering which flower I start with in each of those clusters so that they don't all look the same. I'm doing the second and fourth flower in two of them, and then the first, third, and fifth flower in the other. So for the darker versions, I started with the BV17 at the bottom of the flower, blended up with the BV13 and then the BV11. And then I'm going to switch to a softer combo for the rest of the flowers. I'm going to use BV quadruple zero, BV00, and BV01. I started with the BV01, blended out with the BV00, and then used the BV quadruple zero for the highlight. Although this combo ended up coming out a little bit more cool toned than I wanted. It looks nice with the darker purple flowers, but to match the pattern paper that I wanted to use on the card, I needed some of the flowers to be slightly warmer. So I'm just going to go over the lighter ones with the V000, which is going to just add a little bit more of a pinky purple to them, which is what I was going for. I'll use BG10 to just outline the edges of the speech bubble, give that just a bit of definition against the sky background that I'm going to be placing it on. And then for my butterflies, I decided to go back to the V000 and also added in V01 and V04. And I usually start with the darkest shade toward the body of my butterfly, but I decided to switch it up today and actually put the darkest shade on the outer edges of the wings, and I really like how that looks as well. So I added that first and then blended out with the V01 toward the body, and then finished with that V000 and trimmed all of these images out with their matching dies. Moving on to my focal panel, I've used the brand new Stitch Scalloped Oval Stackables to trim down some Bristol smooth surface cardstock. I used the second largest die in that set, and I'm going to add a sky background to this using the cloudy stencil and some salvaged patina distress oxide ink. I am trying to avoid the white scallop on the outer edge of that stitching detail. I wanted to keep that as light as possible. If I get a little bit of ink on it, it's not the end of the world, but I just wanted it to be a bit brighter. So I'm trying to avoid that as much as I can. I used two different sides of the stencil to give me my cloud formations, added a bit of ink underneath so it's not so stark white at the bottom, and then I'm going to do some splatter detail to just add some extra interest. So I pressed some of that salvaged patina distress oxide ink onto a block, and then I am adding a tiny bit of water to that, mixing it up with a thin paintbrush, and then tapping that off the edge so I get a nice fine spray of dots. And then I'll set that aside to dry. For the ground, I've used that same die and then trimmed that in half using one of the stitched simple wavy borders. This is the medium-sized one. And I will blend on some gathered twigs distress oxide ink. And again, I'm just trying to avoid that white scallop border as much as I can. So I'm just blending that on gently, but adding firmer pressure up at the top so it really draws attention to that stitching detail. And then I'll bring in some antique linen. I'll blend over where I left off with the gathered twigs and then take that the rest of the way down the panel. And this time I'm going to also do some splatter, but only using the darker shade, the gathered twigs. So I'm just going to repeat the process, press that onto an acrylic block, mix it up with a thin paintbrush, and then tap that all over the background until I have a nice spray of dots, which is going to match the little dots that I added to the Copic colored mounds of dirt. So I'll set that aside to dry as well, and in the meantime I'm going to work on my sentiment. I'm just going to add a scrap of white cardstock to my MISTI, and I'm going to stamp out the sentiment "It's Mother's Day" from the A Mole Lot of Flowers stamp set. I stamped that down twice to make sure it was nice and bold. And then I'll pop my card base in my MISTI. I'm using lilac cardstock, and I'm going to stamp on the inside using Seedless Preserves Distress Oxide ink. So I am going to take one of the little moles that's popping out of the dirt and the heart speech bubble from A Mole Lot of Love, and then I'm also going to stamp a sentiment from that set into the little heart speech bubble that says "I really dig you," because I love a good pun and this one is just too cute not to use. So I will set that aside as well, and I'm going to move on to some pattern paper. I'm using the brand new Blissful Blossoms 6x6 pad, which I absolutely adore. I'm going to tear out the two matching purple sheets. So we've got the one that has the lines with the little leaves, and then the one that has the little trio of flower sprigs. I trimmed down the floral piece with the largest of the large stitch rectangle stackables, and I'm going to glue that to my card base with the jumbo glue tube. And this is going to cover the entire card front. This is an A2 standard size card, so it's 4¼ tall by 5½ wide. Then I'm going to take the stripy leaf print and just make sure that it's running the correct way up, and then I'll run that across the center of my card horizontally. Then I can bring in my focal panel. I've added some Scotch 3M foam tape to the back of that to give it a bit of dimension on the card, just making sure that that is centered before I press that down into place. And then I've also used the Sandy Beach accents to cut a couple of little areas onto my focal panel that I can slip some of these images onto. And I'm going to do that before I glue it down because I just find it easier to be able to tuck those inside this way. I'm going to take one of the little flower clusters and tuck that into the one on the far right. And then I'm also going to take the little baby mole and tuck that into the one at the bottom center. And then I can go ahead and glue this panel onto my card front, just avoiding the top edge of that bottom part of the focal panel so I can still slip things behind it if I need to. I'll glue that down into place and just make sure that the little scallops along the edges all line up. And then I'm going to take my daddy mole and place him at the top of the dirt over toward the right hand side. And then before he is adhered completely, I want to take this larger cluster of tulips from the spring basket and just tuck that behind one of the little, top waves of dirt. And then I'm going to take another one of the tulip clusters. This one is from the A Mole Lot of Flowers stamp set, and tuck that into the wheelbarrow. And then I'm going to add that over on the right hand side of the card to balance out the daddy. And I did have to just peel up the baby's head a tiny bit to tuck the wheel of the wheelbarrow behind, but then I just smooth that back into place. Now I'm going to take that little speech bubble and I'm going to add that to the mom mole and just tuck the edge of that behind those taller tulips. And then I've got my little earthworm that is popping out of the dirt that's going to go over on the bottom left. And then I'll have the single earthworm over on the bottom right in front of the other little tulips that are popping up. Then I have my two little butterflies. Those are also from the spring basket stamp set. And I was just trying to decide which one I wanted to place where. And I decided to put the one that was flying sideways, the side view, I should say, toward the flowers. So it looks like it's about to land on those. And then the one that we see from the front, I'm going to place up at the top near that speech bubble. So I've trimmed down the Mother's Day sentiment with one of the Everyday Sentiment banners. This is the smallest one. And I am going to adhere that right down at the bottom of the oval focal panel. Just making sure that's all nice and straight. And then I can bring in a little bit of glitter. I'm going to add Stardust stickles to the two butterflies, to the edges of their wings. And then I'll also add just a touch to each of the flowers so that they just have a little extra sparkle to them as well. Once I finish that, I'm going to lift this card up for you guys so you can see it in a bit more detail and also give you another peek at the inside. I had so much fun bringing some of these new products to life, so I really hope that you enjoyed it too. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and leave me a comment down below. I love to hear from you. And thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you soon in another video. Bye-bye!